Another in the series of presidential profiles, James Madison, 4th President of the United States.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America.
The father of the Constitution. This was James Madison, a man who combined a thorough knowledge of constitutional law with an undying love of liberty and shaped the American system of government. A frail and shy boy, Madison was born and raised in Virginia, a short distance from another famous American, Thomas Jefferson. Poor health exempted Madison from active duty during the Revolutionary War, but he joined his friend Jefferson in the Virginia legislature in 1776 and contributed his voice to the cause of independence. Madison's belief in freedom stirred him to aid Jefferson in drafting the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom.
As long as we assert for ourselves a freedom to profess the religion which we believe to be of divine origin, we cannot deny an equal freedom to those whose minds have not yet yielded to the evidence which has convinced us. If this freedom is abused, it is an offense against God, not against man. To God, therefore, not to man, must an account of it be rendered.
When a treaty of peace was signed with Great Britain in 1783, the newly independent states established a confederation government. The people had rebelled against the overpowering might of the British throne, and they were wary of replacing it with another strong central government. The states ruled supreme, each determined to follow its own course. Madison realized that a loose confederation of individual states was doomed to failure. A stronger but limited central government was needed.
This picture of the consequences of disunion cannot be too highly colored or too often exhibited. Every man who loves peace, every man who loves his country, every man who loves liberty ought to have it ever before his eyes that he may cherish in his heart a due attachment to the Union of America.
In 1787, the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia, and the greatest men in the nation began the work of framing the United States Constitution, the great experiment which established the ground rules of American democracy. This was something new, a government of law where all men are created equal.
Is the experiment of this republic to be rejected merely because it may comprise what is new? Is it not the glory of the people of America that they have not allowed a blind veneration for antiquity or for custom to overrule the suggestions of their own good sense and the lessons of their own experience?
Madison took the lead in shaping the Constitution, working late into the night after each session of the convention. He fought to add the Bill of Rights, the greatest testimony in the history of the world to the freedom of man. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, the right to petition the government, the right to fair trial. It was an astounding document, blazing a new pathway across the pages of history.
Happily for America, happily we trust for the whole human race, they pursued a new and more noble course. They accomplished a revolution which has no parallel in the annals of human society. They created a government which has no model on the face of the globe.
The American dream of liberty had become a political reality. Now, on the shoulders of men like Washington, Jefferson, and Madison, fell the responsibility of making it work. Serving as a member of Congress during the last decade of the 18th century, James Madison joined his friend Thomas Jefferson in denouncing the Alien and Sedition Acts. This law empowered President John Adams at his discretion to prosecute foreigners and American citizens who criticized the government.
The alien bill proposed in the Senate is a monster that must forever disgrace its parents.
The parents of the bill were the Federalist Party, and the public rejected their philosophy when they elected Jefferson to the presidency in 1800. Madison, who had helped Jefferson form the new Democratic Republican Party, was appointed as Secretary of State. Madison believed that the Constitution required that political appointees were limited in their discretionary powers.
The officer appointed by the president should be understood to speak and act with the executive sanction. In other words, the executive is presumed to speak and to act through him.
For 8 years, Madison served the cause of Jeffersonian democracy during a time when America was striving to maintain a foreign policy as an isolationist. Inexperienced in diplomacy, Madison wrestled with the difficult problems facing the United States as a neutral during the long war between France and England. A favorable offshoot of this European conflict was the purchase of the Louisiana Territory in 1803.
The purchase of Louisiana in its full extent, though not contemplated, is received with warm and universal approval. The uses to which it may be turned render it a truly noble acquisition.
But conflict with Great Britain grew more imminent with each passing year, as the British Navy ruled the high seas with an iron fist. American trade embargoes proved unpopular and unsuccessful. And when Madison was elected president in 1808, war was inevitable. England, disdainful of America's will to fight, had followed a policy of boarding United States ships and forcibly removing American seamen. By 1812, more than 6,000 seamen had been impressed into the British service, and Madison declared war.
We behold our seafaring citizens still the daily victims of lawless violence committed on the great common highway of nations, even within sight of the country which owes them protection. Such is the spectacle of injuries and indignities which have been heaped upon our country.
America was ill-prepared for the War of 1812 and suffered heavy losses on both land and sea. In 1814, the British entered Washington and burned the White House and Capitol. But the courageous defense of Fort McHenry, where Francis Scott Key composed the Star-Spangled Banner, and Andrew Jackson's overwhelming victory at New Orleans restored the nation's pride, and peace was achieved. Madison had always wanted peace, though he doubted it could permanently endure.
A universal and perpetual peace, it is to be feared, will never exist but in the imaginations of visionary philosophers. It is still true, however, that war contains so much folly as well as wickedness, that much is to be hoped from the progress of reason. And if anything is to be hoped, everything ought to be tried.
Madison pushed through a series of national programs such as tariffs and the National Bank, then retired from the presidency to his Virginia estate in Montpelier. He was to live for another 20 years, a revered statesman who frequently warned of the growing threat of slavery to the Union. James Madison died in 1836 at the age of 85, the last survivor of America's founding fathers. The father of the Constitution had left as his legacy the American Charter of Freedom, a freedom which Madison felt must be guarded with a constant vigil.
Although all men are born free, and all nations might be so, yet too true it is that slavery has been the general lot of the human race. Ignorant, they have been cheated. Asleep, they have been surprised. Divided, the yoke has been forced upon them. But what is the lesson? It is that the people ought to be enlightened, to be awakened, to be united, that after establishing a government, they should watch over it, as well as obey it.
Another in a series of presidential profiles, James Monroe, 5th President of the United States.
The American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have maintained, are not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers. We should consider any attempt on their part to extend their political system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety.
The words of the Monroe Doctrine, a declaration that forever established the United States as an independent world power. This historic document was the crowning achievement of James Monroe, one of America's founding fathers. In 1776, when news of the Declaration of Independence reached Virginia, James Monroe left the College of William and Mary to join the colonial army under George Washington. 6 months later, on Christmas Eve, the 18-year-old Monroe crossed the half-frozen Delaware River with Washington for the surprise attack at Trenton, New Jersey. Monroe was proud to take part in his country's fight for independence.
I could not stay at home in the present state of the country, and should be happy to bear some part in her defense. For that purpose I joined the army, and will serve until the enemy shall be driven from our soil.
In that battle at Trenton, Monroe received a bullet wound in his shoulder. The bullet remained there for the rest of his life. Monroe served with distinction throughout the Revolutionary War, then was elected a member of the Virginia delegation to the Continental Congress. Monroe did not attend the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and although he felt the Constitution gave the federal government too much power, he strongly supported the aims of the convention.
Mr. Monroe, even though you're not attending, what are your views on the Constitutional Convention?
We all look with great anxiety to the convention at Philadelphia. Indeed, it seems to be the sole point on which all future movements will turn. If it succeeds wisely, and of course, happily, the wishes of all good men will be gratified.
the Constitution was ratified, and as the United States took its first steps as an independent government, Monroe embarked on a lengthy career in foreign service. He served as Washington's minister to France during the French Revolution. His endorsement of this rebellion displeased Washington, and Monroe was recalled to the States. In 1803, he again returned to France as President Jefferson's special envoy, and he helped negotiate the purchase of the Louisiana Territory. Monroe always regarded this as his most important public service.
It is with the highest satisfaction that I learn that the treaty and conventions with France are ratified by President Jefferson, and that the Louisiana Territory will be taken possession of immediately by our troops. This event will prove of incalculable advantage to our country.
In other diplomatic missions, Monroe's efforts proved less successful. He failed to negotiate a treaty with Spain for the purchase of Florida. He failed to provide for the protection of American seamen in a treaty with Great Britain. This treaty was a complete fiasco and was repudiated by President Jefferson. Monroe, however, felt he had done the best he could under the circumstances.
It seemed to me to be for the best interests of our country to get out of the general scrape on the best terms we could. And with that view, to accommodate our differences with Great Britain on what might be called fair and reasonable conditions, if such could be obtained.
Disillusioned and near bankruptcy, Monroe seemed ready to retire from public life. And then, in 1812, war broke out with Great Britain, and President Madison appointed Monroe his Secretary of State. 3 years later, he also became Secretary of War. He supported the war effort with vigor, even pledging his own personal credit to ensure America's victory. It was Monroe who sent Andrew Jackson to defend the Southwest, giving birth to Jackson's legendary fame as the hero of New Orleans.
General Jackson, hasten your militia to New Orleans. Do not wait for this government to arm them. Put all the rifles you can into their hands. Let every man bring his rifle with him. We shall see that you and your men are paid.
Monroe's effective prosecution of the war effort, combined with his part in the earlier fight for independence, made him the logical successor to President Madison. In 1816, James Monroe was elected the 5th President of the United States. Immediately after assuming the presidency, James Monroe set out to join together the diverse sectors of the expanding American nation. He appointed a Southerner, John C. Calhoun, as his Secretary of War, a Northerner, John Quincy Adams, as his Secretary of State, and offered a cabinet post to a Westerner, Henry Clay.
In the formation of an administration, it appears to me that the representation principle ought to be respected, and that the cabinet should be taken from the 4 sections of the Union: the East, the Middle, the South, and the West.
Despite a continuing economic depression, Monroe's early years in office were classified as the era of good feeling. Monroe's popularity continued to grow as he followed nationalistic policy. He embarked on a goodwill tour of the North and the West. He signed legislation providing federal money for national roads. He advocated a policy of territorial expansion, establishing peaceful boundaries with Canada. And when General Andrew Jackson invaded Florida in pursuit of the rebellious Seminole Indians, Monroe reversed an earlier diplomatic setback. A treaty was negotiated with Spain, ceding Florida and all lands east of the Mississippi to the United States for $5 million, less than 18 cents an acre.
To the acquisition of Florida, too much importance cannot be attached. It opens to several of the neighboring states a free passage to the ocean. It secures us against all future annoyance from powerful Indian tribes. And it enables the United States to afford complete protection to the vast and very valuable productions of our whole Western country.
But the country's era of good feeling was slowly dissolving under the pressure of a new national crisis. In 1818, the people of the Missouri Territory applied for admission to the Union as a slave state. Their application was rejected, setting off 2 years of bitter debate in the halls of Congress. The question of slavery had now assumed a political importance it was never afterwards to lose. Thomas Jefferson forecast the impending dangers of the controversy. This momentous issue, said Jefferson, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. Monroe agreed with his old friend that the Union must be preserved.
Nothing can be so calamitous to every section of the Union as dismemberment. With such an event, our Republican system would soon be wrecked. Wars would take place between the states.
Although he sided with the South, Monroe backed the efforts of Henry Clay to effect a compromise. This was achieved in 1820 with the Missouri Compromise, which provided that Maine was to be admitted as a free state, Missouri as a slave state, and slavery forever prohibited in the northern portion of the Louisiana Territory. Now the balance between slave and free states was equal, and Monroe was hopeful that the issue was completely resolved.
Perfection in our system could not have been expected in the outset either in the national or state governments. But no serious conflict has arisen, nor any contest but such as are managed by argument and by a fair appeal to the good sense of the people. Many of the defects which experience has clearly demonstrated in both governments have been remedied.
Nearing the end of his second term, Monroe's domestic problems suddenly gave way to a growing international crisis. Revolts in Central and South American colonies had alarmed the monarchies of Europe. The rulers formed a holy alliance to preserve their overseas possessions by force if necessary. James Monroe believed that this foreign interference endangered America's independence, and he issued the famous Monroe Doctrine, warning the monarchies to stay clear of this hemisphere.
It is impossible that the European powers could extend their political system to any portion of the continents of North and South America without endangering our peace and happiness. It is equally impossible, therefore, that we should behold such actions in any form with indifference.
The Monroe Doctrine became the keystone of American foreign policy for more than a century to come. It was James Monroe's greatest achievement, serving as America's second Declaration of Independence. Independence from the power politics of foreign nations. Although he had served his country for more than 50 years, James Monroe was destined to die in poverty. His death came on July 4th, 1831, the third of our first 5 presidents to die on Independence Day.
The people of America, among whom there was no superior, contended in a common struggle for their equal rights. In that great cause, they sustained every calamity to which savage war is subject. They looked forward to peace and the happy order of things which would grow out of it. For the reward of their toils, their sufferings, and their dangers. And they will not be disappointed.